Hi everyone. This will be a crash course on racism. There's definitely a lot that goes into racism, but we have condensed the information in a few slideshows for you.
Hi, my name is Anna, and we're going to talk about racism. First, I'm going to give you a definition, then an example, and then a proactive solution. So, the definition. Racism can really present itself in a lot of ways because, unfortunately, it's a big part of our society. So, a basic definition is that it's a discriminatory system where one race, the white race or the Caucasian race, has more privilege than everyone else. Like I said, it's present in our culture, laws, and in the inequality between people of color and white people. An example is, and there's so many, so this is just one example, and I'm not meaning to ignore any other ones. In the United States, it was legal to separate people by their color or by their race. White people went to the newer, better schools, they had the newer textbooks, and they had a lot of job opportunities, while people of color, specifically black people or African Americans, they were separated. They had to go to separate schools. They had very limited job opportunities, and that's due to the discrimination or the racism. And again, there's so many. But a proactive solution is to fight racism wherever you encounter it, whether that's within yourself, with your loved ones, your friends, family, neighbors, and in policies like the family separation happening at the border, where brown people are being separated from their children because they're trying to escape, dangerous, violent situations. And then another way you could fight it is standing up against laws that allow employees to discriminate against natural hair, claiming that it's for professional reasons and that naturally curly hair or that dreads aren't professional. Those are both racist things that are happening systematically. So again, racism can be in the culture, you can find it in our history everywhere, you can find it today, just by looking at the inequality of how certain people are treated versus how other people are treated. Thank you for listening. So, a definition of white supremacy is the racist idea that white people or Caucasians are superior to all other races and ethnic groups. It's also the racist idea that white people or Caucasians were put on this earth by God to lead other races. An example is, and again, there are so many, an example is that when Europeans came to the continents that we now call North and South America, and let's keep in mind that there were other names for these places, and they were renamed by Europeans as North and South America. So that's racism within itself, thinking that we get to name something that already had a name. But anyway, when the Europeans came here, they believed they were superior to the indigenous people who were already living and thriving here. And because they believed that, the Europeans, they felt like they had the right to take people's land, to kill them, to take their children away from them, and they would force the children to grow up dressing like Europeans and speaking English, to try to assimilate them and destroy not only their family, but even destroy their traditions and way of life. A proactive solution, I'm going to shout out my sister. She's 12 years old. I asked her, what's a solution to racism? What's a solution to white supremacy? And she said, get a better president. And she's actually right. That's actually a really great solution. So a proactive solution is to vote for people that acknowledge racism and discrimination, that talk about it, and they don't pretend it doesn't exist, and they don't say racist things themselves. Someone that will actively work to remedy the problems that racism has caused. Maybe reparations, maybe having free college that will help more people be able to go to school and have more job opportunities. There's so much that can be done. Again, white supremacy is very related to racism, and thanks for listening.
And I am Maribel, and I will be guiding you through the xenophobia and microaggressions sections of these slideshows. In this section, we'll be talking about xenophobia. So, xenophobia is an unreasonable dislike or hatred of foreigners. It usually has to do with a particular nationality and or culture, and is also usually a bigger societal and or political problem. And although xenophobia is not specific to race, it can often times go hand in hand with racism. So that is why we have decided to include this in this segment. One of the first examples that we see throughout history of xenophobia being a bigger societal and or political problem is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that was passed by Congress to halt immigration from Chinese nationals to the United States at the time. It was the first immigration law that excluded an entire nationality and or ethnicity from entering the country. This also set precedent for other immigration laws and or political actions in the future. Today, xenophobia is very much present in our current political climate. Xenophobic rhetoric and misinformation is often used to gain popularity amongst many politicians. We are seeing a whole lot of xenophobic behaviors and actions in politics, from efforts to restrict immigrants from mostly Muslim countries, also a drastic reduction in refugee admissions into the U.S., as well as efforts to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border, and more recently the denial of asylum seekers from Central America. So let's talk about some proactive solutions and what we can do to minimize our own xenophobic behaviors. First thing is to educate ourselves on the reason immigration from a particular group is happening, and not buying into stereotypes of a particular group that may be created by the media or even our leaders. In politics, let's be active fighters against xenophobic policies that exclude a specific group. And like we learned with racism, let's get comfortable calling out xenophobic remarks and behaviors, starting with our peers and family. So now let's talk about microaggressions. Microaggressions are subtle everyday behaviors that can be verbal or nonverbal. They can be conscious or unconscious, and they communicate hostile, derogatory, and negative slights or insults towards a marginalized group. They are usually directed as a joke or a small offhand comment. They also reflect internal biases that the perpetrator may have and may not be even aware of. And like we said, microaggressions can be both verbal or nonverbal. A very common example of a verbal microaggression is the question directed at people of color that ask, "Where are you really from?" It makes the assumption that someone of color is foreign born. Another verbal microaggression example is saying something like, "I don't see color." This denies a person of color's racial and ethnic experiences as a person of color, and it also erases someone's identity of a person of color. Now let's talk about an example of a nonverbal microaggression, which can be something like clutching your purse when seeing a male person of color. This also makes the assumption that people of color, specifically males, are criminals. So what are some proactive solutions that we can work on for our own microaggressions? First of all, take the time to analyze and question your own personal behaviors. Something may not sound or seem harmful to you, but maybe to the receiving end. It's definitely an unlearning process. So just remember to listen, and if someone says something is insulting, don't invalidate their emotions or label them as oversensitive. That's a sure way to repeat a microaggression, and definitely why they still exist in our culture and society.
Hey y'all, so we're going to cover Islamophobia. As a baseline, Islamophobia is defined as the fear, hatred of, or prejudice against the Islamic religion or Muslims, especially when it's seen as a geopolitical force or the source of terrorism, which is something you see in the media a lot, especially in the West. When I was doing my research on this topic, it was pretty clear that when it comes to scholars, there is like a debate going on the characteristics and like the root of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is considered a form of xenophobia and racism, and many scholars view Islamophobia and racism as a partially overlapping phenomenon. Others, they kind of see it more as a relationship that is primarily on the grounds of religion, not race. So the meaning continues to be debated along with the causes and characteristics of Islamophobia. One of the most recent examples of Islamophobia, at least in the United States, is the Trump administration and what they did in 2017, 2018, which was pretty much issuing a Muslim ban, which prevented nationals from 5 majority Muslim countries, including Syria, Yemen, Iran, Libya, and Somalia, from entering the United States. Another example of Islamophobia is pretty much after a terrorist attack, whether it's in the United States or it's in Europe, often you see the media blaming, not blatantly blaming, but definitely showing the stereotypical characteristics of what Muslims look like, and then also tying that into race as well when it comes to like the different Arabic ethnic groups and races and whatnot. And another example I can think of are the persecution of Muslims that's happening right now in China. So that's also another example of Islamophobia. And ways to combat this, obviously learning about what Islam is, like the religion, is extremely important. And then going to Google, yes, in terms of this, Google is your best friend. Going to Google, looking up what Islam is, looking up the history, looking up what Islamophobia is and the history behind it and the culture around it, along with the movement that is to counter Islamophobia. All of that you can find online. You can find on Google and YouTube. Like, the internet is your best friend. Another way you can combat Islamophobia is building relationships within your community, within the local Muslim community where you are. So another example or way you can make sure that you're you're countering Islamic phobia is also just interrupting Islamic phobia wherever you hear it, especially actually where you hear it. If you hear it from friends, if you hear it from family members, co-workers, stop them and, just have a conversation about the comments they're saying. And then lastly, obviously advocating against anti-Islamic and xenophobic state and federal policies like the one Trump recently put into law. That is a great way to make sure you're combating Islamic phobia. Thank you for listening.
Hi, it's Anna again. Now we're going to talk about anti-racism. So I'm going to give you a definition and an example. Anti-racism is the practice of fighting racism wherever you find it. That can be within yourself, from your loved ones, or in systems and laws. One example is, let's say you hear your neighbor say something racist. just to not traumatize anyone, I won't say anything racist. I'll just let you imagine your own racist comment. It can be subtle, which means that it might not be that obvious that it's racist, or it can be really obvious. It can be a really just explicitly racist thing. So let's say you hear someone say something racist, and instead of ignoring it, and just kind of laughing it off, or, just kind of like, oof, moving on, talking about it. And you can do that as in any way that you feel comfortable. So you might feel like you feel comfortable enough to be stern and say, you know what? I am not okay with what you said. That is racist, and it's harmful to that group of people. It's harmful to our society, and I can't be around you if you're going to say that. That way, you're drawing a boundary, and you're really telling them that you're not okay with that. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, you could also just say, like, why would you say that? You could also say, what do you mean? So you can just question it. And of course, I encourage you to make sure you're safe, because I know sometimes it's not safe to stand up to someone. So always stand up for something and stand up against racism when you encounter it, and if you feel like it's safe to do so. Another example of anti-racism is fighting it within yourself. So let's say you're hanging out with a friend, and that friend is a person of color, and they tell you that something you did or something you said was racist, or that it offended them. It's easy to get offended and to get defensive, because we don't want to feel like bad people. But with anti-racism, you're not really here to be a good person or a bad person. You're here to fight racism wherever it is. And since we live in a racist world, we probably all have some racist beliefs. So sometimes you're gonna have to fight it against within yourself. So if you're anti-racist and someone calls you out for it, you can take a step back and see this as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and become a better ally. And this way, it takes the pressure off of someone. You don't have to say, I'm not racist. You can say, I'm anti-racist. And that shows that you have progress. You're always learning. You're always moving and always trying to be better. So for this particular word or term, I'm not going to give a proactive solution, because anti-racism is the proactive solution. I think it's a huge solution to our problems. Not to sound too idealistic, but anyway, thanks for listening.